Hello everyone, welcome again to Psychology 303, Analysis of Everyday Behavior. And today we have our last video talking a little bit about generalization. So throughout the quarter, we have talked about generalization as it pertains to many of the different techniques that we've talked about. But today we're going to spend a little bit more time focusing in on some of the different strategies, generalization strategies that we can use to make sure that our behavior isn't solely attached to one single discriminative stimulus, and that it applies to appropriately similar behaviors. So we can think about some of the examples we've used throughout the quarter. The woman who complains to their nurses, the staff want to get rid of that complaining behavior, so they use differential reinforcement. But let's say the old lady is still complaining to other nurses, but just not the specific nurse that's implementing the strategy. How do we change this? Let's think about the person who wanted to be more assertive in their workplace. They've used behavioral skills training to learn how to be more assertive, and they are saying no to some of these work-related requests, but some non-work-related requests are still being followed through on. How do we change this? We can think about the Little League baseball player who's learned how to hit a baseball at practice using prompting and fading, but during the game they just can't hit the ball. These different situations, different types of tasks, different people interacting with, we want these behaviors to generalize to all of these situations. So in essence, when we're talking about generalization, we're talking about broadening the amount of stimuli that should activate the target behavior, the desired behavior. We want stimulus control to be held by more stimuli other than one specific discriminative stimulus. And we want it to appear in all relevant situations. Or we want the behavior to have changed appropriately in all situations. So again, outside of training, when we talked about BST, you can think about you learned how to take effective notes probably in a class, but you're using that in many different classes, many different classrooms, in front of many different people. So that might be a skill that has generalized effectively, but you can probably think of some other situations that have not. Maybe you can only effectively work in one specific room. How can you change this? How can you study effectively in all areas, not just the library? Some of these techniques may help. So what are some of the strategies that we can use for generalization? Well, there are three kind of broad categories that we can divide these strategies into. The first is reinforcing behavior outside of training. So when we talked about BST, we talked about learning how to perform a specific behavior within a specific context. And then ideally, we want that behavior to occur in the real world outside of the training context. So one way of doing that is to reinforce every single time it occurs outside of training. Obviously, this isn't always possible, but sometimes, say for example, if parents are trying to teach their kids to behave in a specific way, you can then tell those parents to reinforce the behavior outside of training. Otherwise, it's very difficult for you as the ABA specialist to actually go to someone's house and reinforce every instance of a specific behavior occurring. Another way we can approach this is to utilize natural reinforcement, utilize natural contingencies of reinforcement to encourage the behavior to occur in the real world. So that could be teaching skills to people that are naturally reinforced in day-to-day life, or it could be teaching people to perform behaviors specifically that are naturally reinforced through interaction with other people. So if you want, teaching a skill to a young adult with disability, you might teach them a hobby. Well, them actually being able to, say, knit a scarf and actually end up with something, that is a natural reinforcer of the knitting behavior. So that's a great tool to use. You may additionally, if you're teaching someone to behave in a specific way, you could also teach them to ask others around them if they are behaving in that way, if they're doing a good job, if they're being effective. So that way they're actually seeking that feedback, that reinforcement in the real world. Additionally, we can actually modify the consequences of their natural environment to make the behavior occur more frequently. So that could be encouraging others to reinforce the behavior, just like having the parent make sure that they're reinforcing behavior in the actual natural environment in which it occurs, or it could be eliminating some kind of punishment that already exists in the natural environment. So if you want go with the children with disabilities route again. If you have children with disabilities and you want to encourage them to be happier, be more free to do what they want, not worry about how everyone else thinks of them, one route that you might take is to talk to all the other kids and eliminate any bullying, or at least attempt to eliminate any bullying that might occur. That way, any natural punishers of being ridiculed in the hallway at school can be eliminated, and that way these behaviors that the disabled children are performing can be reinforced a little bit better. So that's one category. Second category would be to practice varying situations and varying responses. So what do I mean by that? Well, in the training session, in the kind of whatever intervention you're using to teach these behaviors, to encourage these behaviors to occur in the first place, you can vary the discriminative stimuli that you use when you attach the behavior. So one example would be to incorporate relevant scenarios actually into the training. So that could be using specific exemplars of the specific situations, the specific objects people should encounter that should lead to this behavior occurring. A great example of this is general case programming. That's when within this training session, the teacher uses multiple examples or a wide range of examples that people should encounter, which should elicit this behavior as part of the training. So for example, if we think about the individual who wanted to become more assertive, we would actually give them examples of requests that they might hear, and a varied range of requests that they might hear, to get them used to hearing these things and being able to force themselves to say no. If you're teaching someone how to use a washer and dryer, rather than just having them learn on one, you might present them with multiple different washers and dryers to get them used to the different types of dials and buttons and ways of controlling them, so that way when they encounter washer and dryer in the real world, they'll be able to more effectively use it. You could incorporate relevant stimuli actually into training. So we used the example of performing self-defense at the park, where they're more likely to perform that way. Maybe you have an example of you're teaching someone how to be more socially skilled, how to interact with people more effectively. It could be the case where they're just not comfortable talking to members of the opposite sex if they're heterosexual, or members of the of the same sex rather, if they're gay or lesbian. So rather than, if in the training session you have them talking to the people that they're most comfortable, kind of putting them in a less comfortable zone, having them talking to the members of the opposite sex or the same sex respectively, getting them used to trying to start a conversation. An additional strategy that we can use in this category would be to teach a wide range of responses that a person should use in order to perform this specific behavior. So what do I mean by that? Well, a great example of this would be if you want to teach someone how to use a vending machine, not all vending machines are equal, just like not all washers and dryers are equal. So you might teach the individual every specific combination that they could encounter in order to help them learn how to use a vending machine. So it could be the letter number combination style, it could be the pressing the button style, it could be the touchscreen style, making sure that people know exactly how to respond to each of these situations can help them generalize these behaviors. And lastly, we can utilize cues and prompts, just like we talked about in some of the other techniques, such as prompting and fading. This could be providing cues in the natural environment to help people perform the behaviors in the specific situations that they need to, such as asking people to wash their hands or not to litter. There are a lot of examples of signs that you've seen that help people, prompt people, cue people to perform behaviors in all relevant situations. And you can also self-generate your cues. You can self-generate your mediators. So rather than just simply the discriminative stimulus that was present at your training leading to the behavior, you can create something, maybe notes or a checklist or some kind of calendar that you had at your training, bring it home, and then that can act as a cue or a kind of prompt to encourage your behavior in the appropriate setting, in your natural setting. So those are examples of strategies that we can use to help us generalize. Again, I've kind of talked about many of them in talking about some of the other intervention techniques that we've talked about as part of this course. But there is one interesting concept inherent in generalization that I haven't really discussed in this video, and that's generalizing, not increasing behaviors, but reducing behaviors to different situations, to different scenarios. One thing about trying to generalize reductions in problem behaviors is that, yes, you want to try and make sure that people aren't performing the behaviors in all of these different situations, but you also at the same time, again, focusing on differential reinforcement, you want to encourage a desirable behavior in each of these situations as well. So if we want to stop smoking, for example, we want this to generalize to all areas. So it might be the case where we're much more likely to smoke when we drink. Well, one thing to do is to not put us into those drinking situations as much. Or if we do put ourselves into those situations, then try and perform a different behavior, such as walking. Try to perform a more desirable behavior and use cues and prompts to help encourage that desirable behavior more so than to discourage the undesirable behavior. So that's all I have on generalization. Thank you for your time and attention. Hopefully all of these videos were a helpful addition to the lectures and all the reading material. But again, I will not see you in the next video, as this is the last video. But thank you again, and I will see you all later. Bye.